I'm a professional artist and used to live alone in my old family home in rural Connecticut. My closest neighbor was about a 30-minute drive away, and the nearest town further still, so it was normal for me to go days without seeing anyone else. As a painter, my art was my sole source of income, so I spent most of my time shut away in my studio. It was located around the back of the house, and being a fair distance from the porch, I often didn't hear knocks on the front door. Because of this, I'd left a note there telling delivery drivers that if they needed me to sign for anything, to go around the back. On this particular day, I had my music playing and was lost in my work when I saw something dart past the window. I didn't have the blinds up since I like staring out at the greenery and spotting the occasional deer and foxes. I thought maybe it was an animal, but I still felt my heart race, so I put down my paintbrush and went to take a look. As I walked toward the door, I saw a man appear at the window. I could see that he had a blue-collared police shirt on. He tapped on the window and gestured for me to open the door. He showed me his police badge and explained to me how there had been a disturbance nearby, and he was just checking if I'd heard anything. I told him I didn't have any neighbors for miles, and noticed how his eyes widened on hearing this. That wasn't all. He also had these scratches and cuts on his face. I noticed how he kept peering over at the barn to the side of my house. I had to repeat myself a few times since he seemed to not even hear me. In fact, he looked distracted peering over at the barn. I don't know, something about him just didn't feel right. Then he told me he was going to go check the barn to be sure, and it'd only take a minute, but he didn't ask for my permission. I decided it was best to mask my unease, so I nodded and wished him a good day. I went back into my studio and watched through the window. He walked with a limp, and as he looked back, he caught my gaze. He managed a slight wave, and I smiled back, but there was something about his mannerisms that seemed off. I locked my studio door, hurried to the front door to lock that too, and checked that all my downstairs windows were secure. Then I called the local police and explained there was a suspicious-looking man claiming to be an officer at my house, but something wasn't adding up. I gave them my address, and the dispatcher explained that there were no call-outs in my area, and I needed to stay inside the house and not try to approach the officer. I was terrified, but I did as they said. I went into one of the back bedrooms that looked out onto the barn. I made sure I was crouched low enough not to be seen. About 10 minutes passed, and I saw the barn door open, and the man in the police uniform stepped out. Only he wasn't alone. Another man wearing sweatpants and a stained hoodie was with him. It looked like things were getting heated between them, and I saw the man in the stained clothes shove the other one. Then he took something out of his pocket. I felt sick when I saw it. It was a gun. The other man was holding something too. It looked like a hammer. I saw him tapping it against his hand as they began walking toward my house. The wait for the police to show up was agonizing. I was so terrified those men were going to break into my house and hurt me. When I heard the knocks on my door, I didn't answer. I just couldn't be sure it was the police or those men. It was only on hearing a female officer's voice call out, identifying that she was with the city police department, that I knew it wasn't those men, and I went and answered the door. The real police officers managed to calm me down, and then they went to go check the barn. In it, they found a damaged police vehicle. In the trunk was a gagged and bound man stripped down to his underwear, badly beaten up and barely conscious. I later found out this man was a real police officer, and those men had attacked him and stolen his vehicle. They must have crashed it close to my house and managed to somehow get it into my barn. It's chilling to know that the officer who came to my window wasn't actually an officer at all. I had stood right next to someone capable of doing this to another person. It fills me with such trepidation knowing it could have ended so much worse than it did. Those two men were never found, and for the rest of the time I lived in that house, I never felt safe. As a rookie police officer fresh out of the academy, I was still finding my way around the job. Even though I hadn't been there long, I'd had my fair share of ordeals, but nothing could prepare me for my first shocking call. I was patrolling an area called Belmont, known for its high crime rates. There was one apartment block there that was known to have a lot of gang and drug-related crime going down, so when I got a radio call about a disturbance on the top floor of that block, I instantly felt on edge. When I got there, my mood didn't change for the better. The building was in a state of utter disrepair. The ground was damp in the hallways with a strong stench of urine and graffiti covering the broken elevator. I took the stairs up to the second floor and walked over to the apartment where the disturbance had been reported. Apartment 905. I listened and heard muffled voices and footsteps coming from within. I knocked on the door and said it was the police. The muffled voices instantly stopped and it went silent. I knocked again and again. I knew someone was in there, but I was hesitant to barge in there if I didn't have to. I tried one more knock before radioing for a code 8, a request for backup. Then I heard footsteps and the door creaked open. A woman peered out at me, early 20s with unbrushed hair and a tired expression. I informed her that the police had been called to a disturbance at the address and that screams, thrown items, and arguing had been reported. I then asked if everything was okay and if I could take a look around. The woman didn't say anything. She just shook her head and went to close the door. I could see her hand trembling, and I knew she was definitely frightened of something or someone. I stuck my foot in the door to stop it from closing, and with my hand on my belt to draw my gun if I needed to, I barged my way into the apartment. That's when things got ugly. A crazed man wearing a wife-beater tank top came out of nowhere and swung a frying pan in my direction. I don't know if he was aiming for me or the woman, but my instincts and training kicked in and I was able to dodge the attack, all the while quickly moving the woman to the floor and away from the man's reach. The man let out some foul obscenities and quickly ran out the front door of the apartment. I radioed again for backup, quickly checked to see if the woman was okay, and told her to lock the door behind me as I chased after the man. I searched every floor of that apartment block, my heart pounding like crazy. There was no sign of him. When my backup arrived, we went back to apartment 905. The woman wouldn't open the door, and we had to force entry. We searched every room of that apartment, but the woman was gone. The most shocking part of all was what we found in the bedroom. The bedsheets were covered in blood. It was completely soaked in it. There were bloody handprints everywhere. I don't know where the blood came from, as neither the woman nor the man appeared to be injured or bleeding when I first arrived. But what was even more disturbing, on a mirror, someone had written a Bible verse in blood. Matthew chapter 15, verse 19. For out of the heart come evil thoughts. We were never able to track down either the woman or the man from that night. To be honest, they'll never be located. So many mistakes made on my first real call. I really beat myself up after that. It was a rookie mistake. I kept telling myself I should have checked the bedroom first or stayed with the woman. I just didn't want to let some maniac run off and possibly try to attack someone else. This was years ago. I still find myself often thinking back to that night and what disturbing event went down in apartment 905. This happened during my time as a police officer in Illinois, near downtown Chicago. On this particular shift, I was patrolling the area and carrying out traffic stops. It started off pretty quiet, and I thought I might be lucky enough to have it be a pretty slow night. Yeah, how wrong I was. I was parked in my patrol car watching the traffic when I observed a beat-up Ford Ranger blow through a traffic light. I hit my sirens and lights and drove after the Ford Ranger. I don't know, I suppose given their reckless driving, I was expecting them to put up more of a fight in trying to get away. But as I drove across the intersection, I saw the Ford Ranger pull into what looked like the entrance to an old warehouse. Upon seeing me, they drove into the parking lot. I guess I just thought that the driver regretted running the stoplight and wanted to be out of sight of any bystanders. I followed them into the deserted and dark parking lot. The whole place gave me the creeps, and I just wanted to give this guy a ticket and get on my way. The driver stopped the car and turned his lights off. This made me think they were going to try and make a run for it, so I hurried out of the car to catch them. Only, when I walked around and shined my flashlight on the driver's side, I saw the driver was still there. He was a male in his late 20s, and he had this vacant look in his eyes. He wasn't alone. There were 3 other adults in the car, 2 women and another guy, all with the same vacant looks. All 4 of them were muttering something under their breath. I couldn't make out what it was. From the movement of their mouths, they seemed to be saying the same thing at the same time, in unison. I told the driver to turn the engine off and explained to him that he'd ran a traffic signal and he needed to get out of the car. He stopped muttering, tilted his head to the side, and gave me a creepy smile. I repeated my instructions again and told him he needed to show me his driver's license and registration and step out of the car. He seemed hesitant to follow my orders at first, and he looked over at the woman on the passenger side who was still muttering to herself. I saw her nod at him, and then he finally and slowly stepped out of the car. I again asked him for his name and to show me his license and registration. He didn't respond at first. I felt myself feeling more on edge by this situation. Then he looked directly at me, placed his hands on the back of his head, and gave me this frantic, wide-eyed look before he ran off behind the warehouse. I chased after him, my hand on my belt ready to draw my gun if I needed to and ready to call for backup. But when I found the man, he was just sitting on the ground, surrounded by debris and trash, his hands still behind his head, muttering to himself as he stared at his feet. I handcuffed him and led him over to my car. That's when I saw the vehicle leaving the parking lot. The woman who had been in the passenger seat was now driving. I caught sight of her vacant expression before she drove away. I could have kicked myself for not taking the keys. I radioed dispatch and gave him the license plate to run. Then I took the muttering man back to the station. He muttered under his breath the entire drive back and during questioning. He refused to give his name, but the next day when I went into work, he'd been bailed out. I never did find out who he was or who any of them were, or how he was allowed to just get off so easily. The whole thing just made no sense. It brought up far more questions than I had answers. I've seen some horrendous things in my job, but still, to this day, this remains the strangest.